It's actually quite good. Just literally thought that on the spot. Credit where it's due. If you'd like to turn your Bibles to Luke chapter 19, if you've got one with you, that's amazing. Give me a wave if you are up for reading just a few verses this morning. Lewis, thank you, first hand. Let's have you out, thanks. Come and read to us. We're continuing our series, looking at the days before Jesus died. So it's going to be on the screen behind you.
When Jesus entered the temple courts, he began to drive out those who were selling. "It is written," he said to them, "My house will be a house of prayer, but you have made it a den of robbers." Every day he was teaching at the temple, but the chief priests, the teachers of the law, and the leaders among the people were trying to kill him. Yet they could not find any way to do it, because all the people hung on his words. That's it. Good. I was running out of breath, to be honest.
Thanks so much. Okay, so that's my first volunteer, and I need a second volunteer to do a bit of a taste test. We're going sort of full youth talk this morning. Okay, Sindiso, yeah, round of applause, Sindiso. Let's have him up to the front. I think you will need to take your mask off just for a couple of seconds. Okay, so in front of me, I have two glasses. Okay, here's the first. This is a cup. I wanted to put it in a cup to distinguish it from the glass, but it didn't really work because part of the thing is that they look exactly the same, but you can't see it. So maybe those at home watching can see that this looks exactly the same as what is in the glass. So what does this look like to you?
Cola.
Cola. Okay, fantastic. So I'm going to ask you just to try these two separately. So why don't you start with the yellow cup of what looks like cola? I'm going to have a bigger sip than that. Come on. It's Mother's Day. Okay. How does it taste to you? Just give us some feedback.
Yeah, tastes like cola.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so just do whatever you need to cleanse your palate a little bit as well. Just try and get neutral again in there. And here's the second one. Okay, keep going, just another little sip. Yeah, just consolidate whatever you're thinking. Give us your feedback, what do you think?
It tastes like watered down cola, but I think it's, should I say what I think it is?
Yeah, go on then.
Dr. Pepper.
Okay. Thank you so much, Cindy. So please take your seat. Okay, so the first one is just your bog standard Coke, full fat, the red stuff. The second one is diet caffeine-free Coke. Okay, and as a 6-year-old, I was very lucky to grow up in a supporting and loving environment. I had everything I needed, but there was one thing, okay? There was one thing, my packed lunches, all right? Had bog standard ham sandwiches, maybe a little piece, maybe a little, those penguins from Asda, I think they were called puffins. Had a puffin, and then pretty much every day I had a can of diet caffeine-free Coke, because that's what my mum bought from Costco. And this wasn't just for like a year. This was basically from the age of about 6 to about 16, okay? And I used to petition her, and I used to say, "Come on, Mum, it just tastes like drain water." It's not very nice, is it, Cindy? So, and she got them at a deal, at, sort of warehouse prices at Costco. And to be fair to her, Mother's Day, she stuck to her guns. She said, "No, that's what you're getting." And so we just got on with it. When I was at uni, I accidentally drank a full glass of undiluted, double-strength orange squash. And somebody asked me, "Did you mean to drink that?" And I kind of just styled it out and was just like, yeah, that's how I always drink it. That's how I always take it. I'm like that. And kind of that, from that moment, my journey was sort of complete, I think, from weakness to greatness. From zero strength and zero taste to super strength and just kind of really pushing the envelope. So I'm starting today's talk with these very silly stories because we're thinking again today about Jesus and about the days that led up to his crucifixion and just why he ended up on that cross. And Jesus did many things, but one thing that he didn't do was live a watered-down, pointless, diet, caffeine-free Coke existence, okay? It was completely the opposite. Jesus' life was full on. It was full strength. You know, he died at 33-ish, and he changed the world forever. And one of the most famous things that Jesus talked about, most of us will have heard the phrase this morning, life to the full, from John chapter 10, verse 10. And I think sometimes we think about life to the full, and we think, yeah, awesome. Being a Christian is cool. Being a Christian is great. And maybe we daydream about being like a Christian influencer, being paid to go to beaches in Thailand and get John 10:10 tattooed and post it on Instagram or whatever. Maybe we think about the Fonz, you know, hey, everything's all good. Life to the full, okay? Good times, good friends. Everything's going to be okay. But when you look at the days before Jesus died, living life to the full made him incredibly unpopular. In fact, I think you could actually argue that life to the full was what put Jesus on the cross. And then we have to ask ourselves, do we still want that life to the full that Jesus promises? Because life to the full is more than just letting the good times roll. It meant justice to the full, speaking out when things are wrong. It meant friendship to the full, and Jesus was friends with all the wrong people. It meant sacrificial love to the full. It meant telling truth in its fullest. So you get the picture. And today's reading, maybe you can put it just back up, Neil, finish with the reminder that after this incident in the temple that Lewis read us, people wanted Jesus dead. Chief priests, the teachers of the law, and the leaders among the people were trying to kill him. And so that poses the question, well, why? And Jesus comes into this temple area and drives people out. And you don't have to be an expert in Judaism to know that you don't just rock up to the temple one day and start driving people out of that place. I've got a little image here of what the space, the temple space, would have looked like. So in the middle, you've kind of got that sanctuary, the Holy of Holies, where only certain people are allowed at certain times of the year. Then you have these outer courts where different people were allowed at different points. And then to the side, and also that side, the temple, this was destroyed, by the way, 70 years AD. So that's why you've not seen this before. This is kind of a visualization. But out on the edges, we've got the court of the Gentiles. And that was a place where anybody could come. Even Gentiles who are non-Jews could come and make a sacrifice of worship to God. And this is the place that we find Jesus driving people out. But there were issues with the way that the whole thing was being run. And the first issue was corruption. Not something that we are familiar with in the UK, of course. I'm glad that that went down as I hoped. So the idea was that you could bring your own animal for sacrifice, as was custom, but there were people here in Jesus' time who said, oh no, let's have a look at that. No, I'm sorry, God's not going to accept that. I'm sorry, you'll have to come over here and you'll have to buy one of these special animals that's been prepared for no less than whatever the price was. It was supposed to be BYOG, bring your own goat, but they were tricking people out of what they had. And it was a racket. There were tricksters and there were fraudsters. They were running riot. And as always happens when these things happen, it's those who have the littlest and the least who are exploited the most. The people who've made a journey from the other side of the country with nothing, who then end up having to give their savings to buy something they don't need. The temple also had their own currency. Remember, on our own coins, sometimes notes, we have the face of the queen. Well, it wasn't too dissimilar back then. You had maybe Caesar's face on your coin. And the idea of buying and selling in God's house when you've got the image of Caesar on the same, well, that wasn't going to happen, okay? So it had its own currency in the temple. But what happened was certain people were muddling about and fuddling with the exchange rates, okay? So people were getting cheated. and some other people were making a mint out of the poorest of the poor when they had come all the way to make a sacrifice to God. So the first thing is corruption. The second thing was distortion. Because when you think about all this, they just completely missed the whole point of what the temple was supposed to be for. The whole point of the temple was that the presence of God was there. God in heaven, the maker of all things, has come to make his home with his people. But the temple had become about industry and exploitation and economic opportunity, and they'd forgotten to prioritize the presence of God. And they'd forgotten the whole point, which was the worship of a holy and loving God. And maybe some of us know that once we forget about the presence of God in our lives, well, then things just begin to slowly unravel from that point. And that was really what Jesus was trying to point out. And a quick aside before we move on. It's interesting, isn't it? Because as our church, as churches, we want to include everyone. We want to be welcoming. We want to have the court of the Gentile space where everyone can find who God is and find more about God. But also, we don't want to miss out on the presence of God ourselves. We don't just want to be distracted, just only thinking about welcome, because worship is really what we're created for as well. So how do we do both, and how do we do both well and with integrity? Anyway, that's just a little aside. As Jesus went in that day to give them some proper kind of life to the full treatment in the temple, he quoted two scriptures. And the first was from Jeremiah. And when I looked it up in my little Bible, this is from my little Bible, it kind of stuck out like a sore thumb. The beginning of the chapter, it says, false religion, worthless. Can we say that together this morning? False religion, worthless. It really sticks out when you read it. And I'm just going to read a few verses from Jeremiah chapter 7. We're going to have them just up behind me. Hear the word of the Lord, all you people of Judah who come through these gates to worship the Lord. This is what the Lord Almighty, the God of Israel, says. Reform your ways and your actions, and I will let you live in this place. Don't trust in deceptive words and say, this is the temple of the Lord, the temple of the Lord, the temple of the Lord. And then verse 9, it says, will you steal and murder, commit adultery and perjury, burn incense to Baal, and follow other gods that you've not known, and then come and stand before me in this house, which bears my name, and say, we're safe? Safe to do all these detestable things? Has this house, which bears my name, become a den of robbers to you? But I have been watching, declares the Lord. Wow. Okay. So that's the passage that Jesus is quoting when he says this is supposed to be a house of prayer. It's become a den of robbers. And maybe some of us here have observed this, that one of the real tragedies of the church and of church life is when we end up doing stuff that we don't like or enjoy to please a God who was never even interested in us doing those things in the first place. Say that again. One of the real tragedies of church life is that we end up doing stuff that we don't like or enjoy, trying to please a God who was never interested in those things in the first place. You know, who are we really trying to please when we get sucked into this kind of false religion and just going around the houses and just keeping up appearances? You know, that is not what we've been created for. That is not what we've been saved for. We've been saved for relationship with God. And the good news here is that devotion to God is tied up with our freedom in God. Okay, so there might be the odd song, maybe even today, that we don't love. And that doesn't necessarily mean that we burn the place down. But we are not called to worship God like caged hens, suffocated by the trappings of rigid religion or false religion, because Jesus came to set us free from all of that. And he calls us to true devotion, not false religion, but true devotion, and I guess full strength religion. This is a little chunk in the middle of the passage that I just read you from Jeremiah 7. It says, if you really change your ways and your actions and deal with each other justly, if you don't oppress the foreigner, the fatherless, or the widow, and don't shed innocent blood in this place. And if you don't follow other gods to your own harm, then I will let you live in this place, in the land I gave your ancestors forever and ever. I think that is actually life to the full and full strength religion. There's nothing caffeine free in there. And it's, just reading and preparing this passage this week, when it comes to church, I've just been reflecting, we're all programmed to think, we call it ABC, to think about attendance, to think about buildings, to think about cash. But is that the stuff that's really the heartbeat of the kingdom? Or is even some of that tied up in false religion? There's a reckoning going on in the world at the moment. I don't know how much you guys kind of keep up with what's happening at different big churches around the world. My recommendation would be don't, I do far too much of it, and it doesn't necessarily make me much happier. But there is a reckoning. There's scandal after scandal. There's exposés and exposing of unhealth, and really where the focus has been all wrong, where the focus has been building Christian empires instead of just getting on with the day-to-day stuff of the kingdom. And much of the church has become, like Jesus said, corrupted and distorted. Where your treasure is, your heart is also, Jesus said. And when it's all just a performance, it's empty, it's worthless, it doesn't even satisfy us at all. So the first one that he quoted was Jeremiah. The second one was Isaiah 56. Okay, let no foreigner who is bound to the Lord say, the Lord will exclude me from his people. Okay, so this is for everyone. And the second one, their burnt offerings and sacrifices will be accepted on my altar, for my house will be called a house of prayer for all nations. Again, the prophet Isaiah, God's words to the world, this is for everybody. Everybody gets to play. Everybody's invited to the feast of the kingdom. And the temple was to be a place of embrace and inclusion. And you can see in this passage a kind of foretaste of Pentecost to come, when God's Spirit was poured out on everybody. And Jesus says, I want this place, this temple, to be a house of prayer, a place where everyone can come and make their sacrifice without being sold down the river, without being sold something that's cheap or false or distorted. I don't want to settle for anything less. Because Jesus wasn't so much interested in the external trappings of what it looked like and felt like. He was interested in the heartbeat of God. The burning heartbeat of the temple was to be prayer. And it is exactly the same for us today. One of my favorite little worship songs at the moment, from a group called Maverick City, has the lyrics. It says, it's not a building that you want to fill, it's my heart. This empty space is what you've wanted all along. Psalm 51 says, a broken spirit you will not despise. And I guess where I'm going with this is that when we clear the way for God, just like Jesus cleared the way in the court of the Gentiles, he will fill that space with the good things that he has for us. And I'm sure we generally all agree, wouldn't it be great if certain religious institutions around the world cleaned up their act a bit? But it's a bit more challenging when we kind of turn the spotlight onto ourselves. What if we are the temple? What if our bodies are a temple? What if our minds are a place that we can connect with the presence of God? Would we be just as critical as we are of people on the other side of the world? Or do we sometimes want grace for ourselves and judgment for them out there? Because I know that's how I work, basically. And so where has the message become corrupted within us? Where has the message become distorted within us? This message of grace, of mercy. And this image that this story gives us of Jesus driving out corruption just shows you he's fierce, he's passionate, he's determined about making sure that the place of God's presence is not a place where sin just happily lives alongside. Jesus doesn't want sin to thrive. Jesus wants his church back. And Jesus wants his people to be committed to the presence of God. And so the image I want to finish with is just that, is that driving out. Come and drive out unforgiveness in me. Come and drive out bitterness in me, God. Drive out the apathy that I experience. Drive out the hypocrisy that stops me really from connecting with you and connecting with others. Drive out the addictions within me that keep me locked in a cycle of shame. Because maybe you've tried to do this without God's help, but the animals are still there, and it stinks a little bit, and you're a bit stuck. So Lord, come and drive it out. And help me and help us to host your presence and grace in a fresh way. Help me to throw off false religion and draw near to you, living life to the full. These were the days that Jesus died. These were the days that people watched him and thought he's trying to pull down the systems that we've put up, and they didn't like it. But these were the days that Jesus spoke truth into our world, and nobody's ever spoken a truth like the truth that Jesus spoke in those few days. And on the cross, God forgives us. And God forgives us for our idol worship that we read about in Jeremiah 7, for our waywardness and our wickedness as well. He says, I'm going to deal with the implications of your sin. I'm going to defeat it, and I'm going to destroy the power of death in my own death. And on the cross, God displays his eternal love for the world. And he shows us what true and perfect neighbor love looks like, that he lays his life down for us. And it's the most beautiful thing